Okay. So we're going to start with a brief introduction to what we're going to talk about in the course. So this course is anatomy and physiology, right? So those are two branches of biological science that in many schools are taught separately. However, we teach them together, and in my opinion, it makes a lot of sense. Okay? Anatomy, it works in the structure, it studies structure. And if you think that there are no more discoveries in anatomy, actually there are. I mean, they kind of minor, but there are discoveries even in human anatomy. Well, a couple of years ago, there was a major discovery. For a long time, we scientists thought that there is no lymphatic system in the brain. 2 years ago, it was discovered. There are lymphatic vessels in the brain. It was huge, okay? Now, physiology studies function, how things work. So say, anatomically, you can look at this gentleman right there. How are we going to call him? That skeleton? Give him a name. Huh? Marvin. Excellent. He's going to be Marvin for the semester. So you can look at Marvin and name all the bones. It doesn't give you the appreciation, though, of how these bones are formed. Okay? But if you look again at Marvin and see, for instance, that his legs are bent, knowing physiology of the bone metabolism, you can say, oh, his legs are bent. He may have had rickets when he was a kid, or maybe he's a jockey. Okay? So you look at the structure and you can guess function. Or, knowing the function, you can presume what kinds of structures can there be. So essentially, function defines the structure. And I give you the example here, just one example, but there are many more, okay, that can be found around the human body. So look at this picture. Has anyone ever held the heart? Okay, great. Held a heart. How about, is that what it is? Tissue-wise. Muscle. So lean, thick muscle. Because it has to pump the blood through the body. Okay? Now right side, just an example, right side of the heart pumps the blood into the pulmonary circuit, to your lungs, which is a rather small circuit. Left side of the heart pumps the blood into the rest of the body, all through all the muscles, all the organs, the brain, whatnot. So the systemic circuit is much bigger. So left side, if you would look at the left side, you will see that its wall is much thicker, yes, because it has to produce much more effort. Does that make sense? Another example is your muscles. Your muscles have they have fibers, okay, that consist of the elements called sarcomeres. So muscles can contract by sliding the fibrils in them, okay, to move the bones, but they also can stretch, okay, because of the sarcomeres, being able to spread out. Look at the bladder. It's stretchable. So it can accommodate more urine, as kidneys produce more and more. So you don't have to empty the bladder, after 15 or 30 minutes. Okay? You look at every structure in the human body and you will see that function is directly linked to how it looks like. Now, there are different branches of anatomy and physiology. And I want you to be able to recognize those branches. For instance, for anatomy, When we talk about the Arnolds, the Arnolds that are here, the muscle men, we call them Arnolds. You look at the Arnolds and you look at the muscles, and it's going to be gross anatomy, okay? Something that you see with the naked eye, something that you can recognize without using the microscope. Gross anatomy of the muscular system, gross anatomy of the skeletal system, gross anatomy of the digestive system. You can see the guts in those two figures, okay? On the other hand, you can look at the microscopic composition of the organ or of the tissue, and you can say, okay, we have, say, pancreas. And we'll look at the microscopic slide of the pancreas, and we see the Langerhans islands, and we see acinar cells, and they are different, so they structurally different, so they have different function. We see that they have different structure, they have different function, and that's going to be microscopic anatomy. Anatomy will not give you the answer what they do, okay? Anatomy will give you the answer what they look like, okay? Of course, you can have things like pathological anatomy, okay? So when you see patho, what does that mean? Nope. Disease. Patho means disease. So pathological anatomy means anatomy of the disease. Okay? You look at, I don't know, a tumor, and you see it has certain structure, and it's not normal structure of the tissue. So it's pathological anatomy of the tumor. Okay? Physiology also comprises a number of different branches. It tells you how things work. So you can have physiology that looks at the functions at the cellular level of the organ, heart physiology or bladder physiology or stomach physiology, physiology of the system, when you talk about the physiology of the entire respiratory system, and that's what we're going to focus on. We're going to talk about physiology of the muscle system, skeletal system, nervous system. You can do the physiology of the entire organism. It can be human, it can be dog, cat, I know, frog, snake. You can do comparative physiology, which is very interesting. When you compare the physiological adaptations between different organisms. What are the differences in physiology responses to cold in, say, humans and in bears? Okay, so bear hibernates through the winter. There are certain physiological mechanisms that allow it to do that. Clear? Good. So know the branches. Now, when I say know the branches, I give you sort of a broad definition, and you pick the branch out of the list. Okay, the study of the function of the heart will be an organ physiology. Make sense? Okay, understanding the structure of the organ in the disease will be pathological anatomy. We clear? I'm also going to give you questions that describe the link between structure and function. You will have to pick one that actually describes the link between structure and function. Okay, you will see it. So the purpose, like a little bit of a digression, the purpose of the quiz is to get you comfortable with the types of questions that you're going to run into in the exam. Does that make sense? So for you, it's meeting the question. For me, it's testing the questions. I may ask you something that I think is pretty obvious, and you will be struggling with that. You will be confused. And I will see it and tell myself, aha, this is not a good question. I need to exclude that. That type of question goes away. Makes sense? So it's actually a quiz for us both. Now, organism, the levels of organization, we have to remember certain things, and I want to make it very, very clear. Well, I'm going to skip atoms and molecules. It's not a chemistry class, and we're going to get to the cell. Okay? We have numbers and numbers of different types of cells. How many cells do we have in the human body? Human cells, I mean. How many human cells we have in the human body? I'm not going to ask you. Huh? Trillions. I'm not going to ask you numbers. In this course, I will not ask you numbers. Well, there will be one question about numbers in muscle physiology. That's it. I'm not going to ask you numbers. Okay? Yeah, about 10 trillion. Why did I say how many human cells we have? What other cells we have? Bacterial cells, yes. In bacterial cells, we have, according to different estimations, 10 to 100 times more than human cells. It's not a lot, actually. You care about like 3 pounds of bacteria in your guts all the time. Okay. So cells. When different cells, okay, are, well, when different cells are combined, they form tissue. Okay? Tissue may consist of a single type of the cell, say smooth muscle. But usually it involves multiple types of cells. Let's say in the connective tissue, you're going to have fibroblasts, you're going to have some immune cells like mast cells, probably neutrophils, okay? They similar but not identical, okay? And tissue, smooth muscle tissue, the epithelial, well, muscle tissue, epithelial tissue, nervous tissue, it performs certain type of function. And we're going to talk about different types of tissues at a certain point, okay? Now, when you combine different tissues form organ. That's pretty much a definition of an organ. The structure in the human body that performs a certain function and consists of multiple tissues. Which organs do you know? Most of my questions are simple. Go ahead. Heart? Something else? Skin? Yes, skin would be better defined as an organ, although we call it a system at the same time. Yeah, go ahead. Stomach, excellent. Brain, an organ. Kidney. They all consist of different tissues. So look at the heart. Just mention what the heart is, mostly. Muscle, but it is covered on the outside with pericardial membrane, which is epithelial tissue, on the inside endocardial membrane, which is epithelial tissue. It has nerve cells in it. Okay, so there are different tissues that comprise the heart. Same goes for kidney, it's connective tissue, epithelial tissue, nervous tissue. Same goes for brain, which is nervous, and a little bit, since they're blood vessels, it means epithelial tissue as well. Make sense? So many tissues, several tissues that form one structure will give you an organ. Now, when you have several organs that all together provide certain function to a body, it'll give you an organ system. There you go, here. Organ system, like this cardiovascular system. What does blood do? Oh, sorry, what does heart do? Because it just pumps the blood, right? Now, does it pump it just, just wherever? No. Where does the blood go? Huh? Veins, arteries, blood vessels, right? So vessels are sort of useless without a heart, and heart is sort of useless without vessels. But altogether, they enable a human body to have proper blood circulation, proper delivery of oxygen, nutrients, hormones, immune cells. Make sense? So that's a different functional level. And, you know, systems comprise the body, but that's not that interesting. I want you to understand the levels. I give you definition, you pick the level from the list. Or I give you the level and you pick the definition from the list. Make sense? Cool. Now this concept, I am willing to spend as much time as we need on it for you to understand that it's a fundamental concept of physiology. It's a concept of homeostasis. Okay? The sense of the word, you can think of it this way. So, stasis. What does stasis mean? Huh? Maintain. Yeah. Stay. Be in the same position. And homeo, think about home. Being at home. Being at the most stable position possible. Make sense? Now, if you think about the human body, we have 10 trillion cells. What is between the cells? Huh? You're very close. Not water, but fluid. Okay? Cells are surrounded by fluid. And that fluid, if you think about this for a second, cells are constantly immersed in the fluid. Well, except for the outer dead cells on the surface of the skin, they are immersed in the fluid. That fluid creates the environment for the cells. Make sense? That environment is called the internal environment. Obviously, whatever is here, temperature, air, you know, humidity and stuff, that's external. So homeostasis is the maintenance of the constant conditions in the internal environment. Now let me ask you this. When I say maintenance, does that mean that conditions in that internal environment are always the same? It doesn't, right? So it's a dynamic process. It's a dynamic equilibrium. Let's write it down. It's a dynamic equilibrium. Can you just, not even without looking at the slide, give me an idea which parameters of internal environment we can measure in a human? Good. Temperature, great, excellent. Huh? pH, fantastic. Temperature, pH. Say again? Ions, right? Concentrations, okay? You said bicarbonate? Bicarbonate, sugar, well, glucose, sodium, calcium, potassium, chloride, whatever you want. You can measure chemical composition, you can measure certain physical parameters, mostly temperature, right? Now it all varies. Make sense? Even the amount of water that you have in your body varies. If you work out in the heat, you're going to sweat and you're going to get dehydrated, right? So you have to think about it, that homeostasis is not like being constant. I prefer to think about it, it's a pendulum, okay? You move pendulum away from its static point, you release it, and it goes back and forth, but it eventually stops the bottom. Okay? That's your example of homeostasis. And what you have to think about is all systems, every system, helps to maintain the homeostasis. Okay, now, How can we maintain homeostasis? There's a go ahead.
Getting rid of what there's too much of and help them produce what there's too little.
Excellent. So, getting rid of what we have too much, or producing something that is in deficit. Okay. So if you think about it, let's just think about it. So if you have too little of something, you need to bring it up. If you have too much of something, you need to bring it down. Okay? So you got to get it to the equilibrium point. This is what is called a negative feedback. You can think of it as it negates the initial change. Initial change is reversed by the response of the system. A great example of it is the regulation of body temperature. When you hot, what do? You sweat. Also, how does your skin look like? Yeah, it's red. Okay, so red is because the blood vessels dilate and you start to give off the heat, and sweat, when it evaporates, cools you down. Make sense? If you are too cold, what do you want to do with the heat? Turn it up. And also, how do you turn it up? You shiver, right? Your muscles contract and produce heat. What else?
Well, say it kind of goes into the core
Yeah.
of your body, so your appendages on the outside get colder faster.
Yes, you can serve it by contracting the blood vessels so you become pale. Blood doesn't give off heat that much. Make sense? So it goes back and forth. Now, if you think about it, it's always, kind of you maybe a little sweaty or a little chilly or a little sweaty or a little chilly. It's a fluctuating process. It's equilibrium. You aren't at the optimal level. You're kind of jumping around it. Does that make sense? Another example. Blood pressure. Let's work through this together. Let's say I have high blood pressure. What's going to happen? Oh, no, I'm not talking about the pathological outcomes. How can I bring it back? I currently have high blood pressure. Huh? What? No, it's a long term. It's a long term, but right away, just in seconds.
Your body's going to pull fluid from your tissues into your vascular system.
That will increase the blood pressure.
Well, you're going to pee more.
That's number one. I'm going to pee more, right? Because I'm going to have more blood coming through my kidneys. It will produce more urine. I'm going to pee more. I'm going to reduce the amount of water in my body, okay? That will reduce the pressure in my blood vessels. What else? No. How can I bring it down? How can I bring down my blood pressure? I can see it, and when I see it, what's going to happen to my, What's going to happen to my heart rate? It's going to go down, so my heart doesn't pump as fast. Does that make sense? Okay. So I have elevated blood pressure, I decrease the heart rate, and I will also dilate my blood vessels. So there's going to be less pressure, and I'm going to pee out the excessive fluid. If I have low blood pressure, what's going to happen?
Now you're going to pull from your tissues into your vascular.
It's a long term. It's a long term response. Again, think about heart will pump faster, blood vessels will constrict. Make sense? Actually, this is the great example because that happens every second in your body. Your blood pressure slightly fluctuates all the time. Okay? Make sense? So it'll go up and down all the time. And that's heart and your blood vessels that will regulate it. Right? Great example is blood sugar. When you eat something sweet, what's going to happen to your blood sugar? It's going to go up. What will your body do? What will your pancreas produce? Insulin. What will insulin do? Reduce the blood sugar, right? Will take it into the, from the blood into the liver and the muscles. Now, if your blood sugar will start to decline, when blood sugar declines, what your pancreas will produce? Glucagon, another hormone that will bring up your blood sugar. Does that make sense? So it also, like a wavy graph, if you would look at the levels of the blood sugar, it's probably going to be something like this. Okay? So please understand the concept of the negative feedback. It's reducing the initial change. Okay? If initial change is increased something, negative feedback will bring it down. If initial change is decreased something, the negative feedback will bring it back. Okay? It's going back to normal. Now, you can see that negative feedback maintains homeostasis, right? Actually, well, we'll talk about some other example later, okay? It maintains homeostasis. What about positive feedback? Well, it's bad. Almost all the time it is bad, except for some examples for which I have this delivery scheme, okay? So in positive feedback, the change that happened to the system in the beginning is amplified. And the result of it is something catastrophic, cataclysmic, something huge. Usually death. But in case of delivery, it's not death. So what happens in the delivery when the spiking level of estrogen right before the delivery, they initially stimulate the muscles of the uterus. Baby being pushed towards the cervix of the uterus. So far, is that clear? When baby is pushed towards the cervix, it starts to push and press on the receptors in that cervix. Receptors that sense the mechanical pressure. These receptors send a signal to the pituitary gland, which is located deep in your head. I cannot possibly show you. I cannot penetrate my head far enough. Okay? So it sends it to pituitary gland, and pituitary gland releases the hormone called oxytocin. Oxytocin directly and indirectly stimulates the contractions of the uterine muscles, pushing baby farther, increasing the pressure in the cervix, which sends signals to the brain, the pituitary gland, which produces more oxytocin, which further increases the contractions, which push baby forward, which sends the signals to the brain, which produces more oxytocin. So it's self-amplifying event. And what it ends up, baby's out. Is that a cataclysmic event? Of course. You had a perfectly fine system, and now you have two bodies. Okay? Now you have two people separate from each other. It's really a cataclysmic event. It's probably the only example of the good positive feedback. I can give you an example of a bad one. It's more complicated than that. In cancer, what you have is the cells that just don't die. They just grow. They actually kind of, in cancer, cells exist separately from you, sort of. Okay, so this is you, this is your cancer, well, not you personally, but this is patient cancer. There's pretty much no regulation. Shock. Did anyone donate blood? Good. Did you feel dizzy? Well, I saw people feeling dizzy. I never felt dizzy too, but you can feel dizzy a little bit after you donate blood. Why?
Because your body has to try and homeostasis again.
You reduce the volume of your blood. You have reduced blood pressure if your cardiovascular system is not competent enough to immediately, increase it. Blood pressure, say, by pumping harder, and you're going to feel a little bit lightheaded. It'll go away, they recommend to drink, some fluids and eat something to kind of bring the volume up. Make sense? How much do they take? A pint. About half a liter. How much do they need to take from you to die? Oh, no.
No. You gotta take maybe 6.
Actually, a little bit more than 4 pints is enough. If you're not taken care of, if they just take 4 pints and leave you there, you're going to die. Here's what happens. Let's work through it. I'm going to give you an example of positive feedback and how bad it is. When you lose blood, what happens to the blood volume in your cardiovascular system? It decreases. When it decreases, what happens to your blood pressure? It drops. When your blood pressure drops, what happens to the blood flow to your organs? It's going down, right? Imagine that you're pumping less water through your plumbing system at home. Okay? So it decreases. Which 2 organs are absolutely essential for your immediate survival? Heart and brain. Well, we can postpone the brain. You don't need to think at this moment. Heart. Lungs don't take a lot of blood, actually. Heart. It requires constant blood supply to pump. If blood supply, because of the dropped blood pressure, goes down, heart, will it pump stronger or weaker? Weaker. If it pumps weaker, what happens to your blood pressure? It drops. When it drops, what happens to the blood flow to the heart? It decreases. When it decreases, what happens to the heart's ability to pump? It decreases. When it decreases, what happens? So it's the ongoing downward spiral, okay? So if you lose blood and you end up in this shock condition, this is called hypovolemic shock. I'm not going to ask you the name, no worries. Hypovolemic means low volume, okay? Hypovolemic shock. Another example, have you heard about anaphylactic shock? What happens? Just one thing. What happens? Yeah. That's a separate thing. I'm talking about the airway swells and you start to suffocate. What happens to the blood vessels? Opposite. They all dilate. So all your pipes become much bigger. So the pressure immediately drops. Make sense? It just tanks down. That's why people can die from it. So they immediately have, not enough blood coming to the heart. And it gets into the downward spiral, so the only thing you can do is the epinephrine. Make sense? Do you understand the difference between positive and negative feedback? Well, I give this analogy. I'm a sucker for analogies. Say I cannot walk here, but since I'm tethered, but imagine I'm walking between you and I trip over somebody's backpack. Okay? If I'm a civil person and let's say I trip over your backpack. If I'm a civil person, you civil person, what do? We say, excuse me, right? Sorry, and the conflict is gone. Now, I may be an asshole and I will say, what the fuck your backpack is doing here on the floor? And you will say, oh, go and fuck yourself, and we're going to start punching each other, and that's a brawl. That's positive feedback. Okay? We aggravate the initial change. Okay, so remember, negative feedback negates the change. Make sense? I am going to ask you Which of the following is example of negative feedback? Which of the following is example of the positive feedback? Which of the following is an example of homeostasis? By the way, speaking of homeostasis, when I sweat, is that homeostatic regulation? When I shiver? When I put on the hoodie? No. It's just me. Okay? Make sense? Now, systems. Review of the systems so we know how they contribute to the homeostasis. Well, the first one, and I put them in the order, well, more or less, we're going to talk about them. So, integumentary system. It's your skin. Okay? How does that contribute to homeostasis? Regulates body temperature. What else? Huh? Excellent. Protects, right? If you skin someone, this person is not well protected. Right? Make sense? That's important to prevent something from, getting into you. Skeletal system. What does it do? Supports. There was a short story by Ray Bradbury about the guy who hated his skeleton. And at the end of the story, he pulled it out. Sci-fi. It supports. It stores calcium. It produces some hormones. It actually stores your bone marrow, which produces blood cells. Make sense? That's its contribution. Muscular system, what does it do? Movement. Why movement is important? More defined. To some extent. Wait. If you're not moving, what's going to happen to you? I'm going to die. Because I cannot get to my kitchen to eat. Seriously. We need to move all the time, right? Make sense? Skeletal muscle does pump the blood a little bit through the veins. Cardiac muscle pumps the blood through the heart. Well, it's a different system, but it generates heat. Make sense? It protects you to a certain extent. Say, your abdominal organs are not protected by anything except your abdominal muscles. Things like stomach and liver, not exactly, but stomach and intestines. Okay. Even this, think about this. Facial expression. Why it's important? For homeostasis. Mm-hmm. I don't really know if it can. If I'm going to be always grumpy, will anybody talk to me? No. And social communication is critical for the survival of humans as the species, right? Think about this. We even have homeostatic regulation at the level of the human population. If you do proper well, first of all, you're not going to get eaten by somebody else, or killed, okay, if you're friendly. Facial expressions are important. Okay, come on, you're going to get laid if you have proper facial expressions. That's important for the survival as well as the population. So it's all important. If you go beyond the survival of the individual and go to the survival of the species, appearance is important. Okay? Nervous system. How does that maintain homeostasis? What does it do? Okay. I want you all to generalize. Just controls? I mean, just I want to hear one word. If I will throw something at you, what you gonna do? Respond to stimulus. There you go. Good job. Now, this is a really good job. Okay? So, it responds to stimulus. It senses the stimulus, whether it's pain. So, like, if you feel pain, what you gonna do? You will try to, not do this. Okay? Make sense? If you see, dog is running at you, what you gonna either run away or try to fight it off, right? So you have a certain type of stimulus which produces a certain type of response. This response can be conscious, like running away from the dog, or it can be completely unconscious. One of the great examples of unconscious response, if somebody grabs you by the arm, what you gonna do? Which move are you gonna do right away? If somebody like unexpectedly, yep, you do this. This is the reflex. This is called the flexor reflex. Okay? What you gonna do with a person who grabs you by the arm then? Huh? Well, the exact movement depends, but generally you're gonna either punch the person in the face or push away. It's called flexor cross extensor reflex. That's the reflex. If somebody grabs you by the arm and you're not aware of what's going to happen, you're going to do this. Okay? That's reflex. That's unconscious response. Make sense? Stimulus and response to the stimulus. That's your nervous system. Cardiovascular system, what does it do? Huh? Pumps the blood. Why it's so important to pump the blood? Oxygen to all the tissues, and it's going to carry more oxygen to the tissues that need more oxygen. What else? Nutrients. It carries nutrients. It's actually the only highway system in the body. Immune cells, blood. Hormones, blood. Nutrients, blood. Okay? It's critical for maintaining homeostasis. Okay, surviving. Respiratory system. What does it do? Like, why do you need to breathe? Oxygen to where? To the lungs, and from the lungs into the blood. When you run, how about your breathing rate? Increases. Why? Exactly. Because your tissues become more metabolically active, right? You need more oxygen, you start to breathe faster. That's example of the homeostatic regulation, right? Make sense? Now, say you are running a 40-yard dash. Your breathing rate will go up. Make sense? Now, what if I will start doing this? Do I need this? Do I need that breathing rate now? No. So it's not homeostatic, right? It's hyperventilating. Make sense? So you can produce some really interesting effects if you voluntarily increase certain parameters in your body. Like you can hyperventilate and pass out. You can go to Cheesecake Factory, which I also call a temple of diabetes, and eat like 2 cheesecakes, and you're going to have like spike in blood sugar, and it's going to be horrible. There used to be a dish at KFC when they had 2 chickens instead of buns in the burger, and it contained like 2 or 3 daily doses of sodium. You're going to have your blood pressure spike to like 200 because of that sodium. So you can dysregulate your body quite well by, overcoming the normal response. Digestive system. What does it do? nutrients. What else? Yes, expels waste. What else? Pulls water, yes, it conserves water from the food. What else? Well, provides nutrients. Yes, breaks down the food to give nutrients. Is your food, huh? There you go. Protects you, right? Because your food is not clean. So all those bugs that you eat, digestive system has mechanisms to not let them in. Well, actually, same goes for any system that is in contact with an environment. Say respiratory system is the same. It protects you from the bugs in the air. You know, digestive system protects you from the bugs in the food. Make sense? Urinary. What does it do? Yes. Yes. Some nitrogenous waste. Urea, yes. It expels waste. What's probably a more important function of the urinary system? I mean, we can argue, but it's... There you go. Fluid balance. Right? If you are dehydrated, what's going to happen to amount of urine that you produce? It's going to be scat and color-wise, dark, concentrated. If you drink like a gallon of water, you're going to pee like crazy, and it's going to be just absolutely transparent, colorless. Make sense? Maintains the fluid balance. What else? What is in the fluid in your body? Huh? Electrolytes. Bingo. So it maintains not only fluid, but electrolyte concentrations, right? Make sense? Which means also pH. Okay. Endocrine system. What does it do? Hormones. Which, why? Why does it produce hormones? Yes. Well, body responds to hormones, but why hormones are produced in the first place? What makes it produce hormones? Some sort, what? Most hormones, yes, they work as the negative feedback, so they should be what in the very beginning? Some sort of stimulus, some sort of a change. Does that make sense? Sort of a regulatory system for slowpokes, okay? Because it works slow. Like, you get something sweet, and your blood sugar will spike, and if you are healthy, your blood sugar will come back to normal in 2 hours on average. Okay, so it takes a while for endocrine system to say build up the proper response. Make sense? And it works for pretty much everything. It's not like a nervous system. If I throw something at you, you're going to catch it right away. It's seconds, you know. Endocrine systems, it's minutes, hours, sometimes days. Make sense? But it's a regulation. Now, endocrine system, I was kind of on past mentioning, you cannot control it. You cannot just voluntarily say, I'm not producing insulin today. No way. Okay, that's going to happen no matter what. Make sense? Lymphatic system. Well, immune system, lymphatic system. Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's say that just because everybody works out. If you're taking like the pre-workout or like, let's say you're taking one of those supplements like protein supplements, it's usually got like a lot of extra sugars, a lot of extra proteins. Let's say your blood sugar spikes on that. Wouldn't you cause it to act a little bit faster if you immediately start working out, as opposed to
let me reiterate and make sure that I got your question correctly. So when you take the pre-workout supplement, which contains amino acids and sugars, will it stimulate the insulin release?
If you start working out, like as opposed to just letting your body sit.
So when you take this in, the insulin will be produced right away, no matter whether you start working out or not. But when you work out, the sensitivity of your muscle cells and liver cells to insulin, their ability to take up amino acids and sugars to build up muscle increases. Working out increases insulin sensitivity. So it is not so much about the insulin production as much about insulin effects on the tissue. Did I answer? So it makes the utilization of that supplement more effective, more directed towards you try to achieve to build up muscle. Make sense?
Yes.
Good. Shorter lymphatic system.
To help fight disease.
Protection, yes. To build up the protection against the infection and, future infections. Any questions about the systems? Recognize system by the function. You're going to have questions like that. This system does blah, 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 blah. You pick one of 4 answers. Am I clear? Fantastic. Let's take a break now.